Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Empathic Leader podcast, where we talk all things empathy, leadership, and emotional intelligence. I am Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller, and I'm so happy to have you here. Please like, subscribe, and comment so that we can keep this conversation going. Our episode today is going to be about the TEDx talk that I have coming up because I've gotten a lot of questions and people really want to know a lot of different things about my experience so far. So I'm happy to share. So this is our TEDx special edition. So the first question that I get over and over is, how did I get it in the first place? Which, I mean, that's a great question. I know a lot of people that have applied over and over and over again, and yet never quite seem to get on the red dot. And for those who don't know, when you watch our TEDx talk, in the middle of the stage, they have a big red dot. And so the speaker, you're supposed to get on there and stand on that red dot. I suppose it keeps people from wandering the stage. Every speaker is different. We all do things differently. So, but that's what that means to get to the red dot. You've finally gotten on stage. So for the applications, you have to have good material. You have to have what they want. You have to be able to speak to what each chapter wants, because TEDx, there's different chapters all over the country. And you kind of have to look at what they want. So like the one that I got, I'm doing TEDx Tulsa, University of Tulsa. And their theme for the year was waves. So I talked about how empathy, when it's used correctly, can really make waves. And I was able to weave what I was talking about into what they wanted their theme to be. So watching what people want is important. The other thing is, frankly, it's just kind of a numbers game. You can't be afraid to be rejected. And this is a perfect place to talk about self-empathy, because it can be really difficult when you're getting rejections over and over again, not because they're harsh, not because they're mean, but just because they are a rejection. And you get the, man, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? Why didn't I get this right? How could I have done this differently? And you just have to keep in mind that it was probably nothing you did at all. That you have to have that self-empathy and that connection with yourself to say, that one just wasn't mine, maybe the next one. And keep applying. You can't let the system get you down, because it's kind of a tough system, But if it's something you want to do, and it's something that you really feel that you have a message that you want to get to the world, TEDx is the way to go, because their whole theme is ideas worth spreading. So let me encourage anybody in the audience as well. If you have an idea that you think is worth spreading, that people need to hear, then don't be afraid to do this. Don't be afraid to try out. Don't be afraid to get rejected. Don't be afraid to be stubborn. Be really stubborn, because your idea is worth spreading. And eventually, someone will get it. The next thing that happened is I did have an interview. And my understanding is it isn't this way with every chapter, but I did have to go in and actually kind of present. They didn't expect me to have my talk completely done, but I did have to say why it fit their theme and why I thought this was an idea worth spreading, which, okay, I'm talking about self-empathy. That's what my talk is on. Self-judgment, self-empathy. Well, I get kind of wound up and passionate about it. So it doesn't really take much for me to be able to say, this is why I think it's important. So again, for anybody out in the audience who feels that this is something that you want to do, that this is something you should be doing, that you have that idea worth spreading, that passion is what will drive you. Because if you actually feel it's important and people need to hear this, you'll get that idea out there. So the next hardest part, as you can imagine, was the amount of time between that interview and when I finally got the acceptance. Because just because you have the interview doesn't mean you'll be accepted. I finaled in a different one and I wasn't accepted. So it's a process. It really is. But I also like to think that because I had to go through so many steps, that by the time I landed the one that I got, that it's where I was supposed to be, that I was a good fit for that particular TEDx. It really is a numbers game. You just have to keep putting it out there over and over. I know I keep saying that, but it's hard with self-empathy to keep having empathy for yourself and not give up. But you can't. You've got to be stubborn. So I actually did my interview right around the beginning of November, and I didn't hear back until December 23rd. And I was wound a little tight. I'm sure you can imagine, wanting to hear. But when I finally did it, was like, yes, this is fantastic. But then the next thought is, I have to give a talk on a TEDx stage. Oh, so now is when you start tapping into the empathy of others and you start digging in on self-leadership. The first thing I did was tell people, I've got this. And not because I wanted, accolades or way to go or anything like that, but because I knew I was going to need support. I was going to need people in my corner that were going to say, yeah, you got this. You can do this. Something that's worth mentioning here, I think, is because I talk about this stuff and I have had experience and I've studied it, I've researched it. Sometimes people get the idea that I know all about it. And the truth is, we're all in the soup together. I'm still learning too. I might be a step or two ahead. I have the logical knowledge of what's going on. But there were days when I was like, man, I don't want to do this. This is rough. I don't want to keep getting these rejections. Can I really get on this stage? Do I really think I have what it takes to be a TEDx speaker? What makes me think that I can take this that I can be in this arena with other people that have talked in my subject area? So understand that if you have those feelings of self-doubt and a little bit of self-shame even, because I would get that, well, who do you think you are? Mine comes from childhood all the way up to the stuff that's happened to present. We all go through it. So the first thing I did was start reaching out to friends because I knew they'd gone through it too and that they were going to back me and that this was all going to be all right. So, the second you get that, yay, and then you go, I have to actually do this. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. Don't be afraid to start collecting your cheer squad around you because that's important. The other thing I started to do was write. I knew what I wanted my talk to be, but I didn't know exactly how I wanted it to go. I knew it was going to be self-empathy. I knew it was going to be about combating self-judgment because I think these are things people really need to know. And I think I can help a lot of people when they hear this talk. And a lot of people will relate to it. I don't know anybody that hasn't dealt with self-judgment and that has a hard time with self-empathy. So I just started writing and writing and writing and getting ideas out and getting thoughts out. And some days I would try to get thoughts out and it would just be like, wow, look at all this great stuff. And some days I would try to get thoughts out and be like, yeah, this isn't working out very good. But I would keep trying just to get ideas on paper. And the next thing I did was show some vulnerability and ask for help. There are people that have taken the dot that are very good at what they do, which is why I'd like to give a shout out to two different parties here. The first is Corey Poirier and Blue Talks, because he talks about TED Talks. He talks about how to get the TED Talks. He talks about, how to construct your thought and how to start putting these things on paper. And he has 5 TED Talks under his belt. So, it was really helpful to be able to attend his boot camps and some of his sessions and to understand some of the people that do his sessions and his events and all of the stuff that goes with it. So big shout out to Corey and to Heidi and to the people that were willing to step in and help me prepare for this. The other person I'd really like to shout out to is Samantha Chris. She has the top-rated talk on goal setting. She's the one who talks about real goals. And this is a person who has been there and done that and is very happy to share her knowledge, much like Corey. So, having the right coaches in the right places to be able to get you where you need to go is imperative. Here's where I want to add a little bit about coaches and coaching, because we currently kind of have a society where we rely on coaches. And I think that's a good thing. If athletes have coaches and they're not expected to just go out onto the basketball court or the football field and just do it by themselves, then why are we any different? I think finding a coach is a good thing, but make sure you take the time to find the right coach. Make sure you find a coach that aligns with your values, which for me, authenticity and integrity are big. And make sure you find a coach that's really going to get you where you need to go. And that means you're going to have to do some homework because there's a lot of coaches out there and they are not created equal. So just be aware. A coach that's a good coach, worth every penny. A coach that's a bad coach can actually set you back. So make sure you know who you're about, who you are, what you're about, and find a coach that's going to help you accordingly. This is important because the last thing you need right before you walk out on that stage is having someone that pulls you back, probably completely unintentionally. They're coaching in the best way they know how, you're learning in the best way you know how, but not everybody is a fit for everybody. So take your time. Make sure you figure this out. So now the TED Talk is 2 weeks from tomorrow. I have 15 days. So I'm running the talk and I'm running the talk and I'm running the talk and I'm running the talk some more. But there are different ways to practice. There's active practicing, which is where I'm actually talking and I'm, pretending I have an audience, or I'm closing my eyes and I'm visualizing the auditorium. I've taken the time to go and find pictures of the auditorium so I kind of know what it's going to look like, that sort of thing. But there's also passive learning, which is where you record yourself and you listen to it over and over. And there's 2 bits that are important to this. The first is that you have to have your talk finalized, because practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So if you practice this over and over, and then you end up changing your talk, it's going to be really hard to break that habit. So make sure you have everything finalized before you get to this point. The second thing is that people usually cringe the first time they hear their own voice. And that's me included. It's funny because I do podcasts and I do audio and I do speaking, but when I have to actually listen to my own voice, it makes me cringe. And that's normal. We're used to hearing our voices from within our own head, and there's stuff up there that vibrates. There's sinus cavities and your vocal cords are part of it. So you hear yourself differently than when you're actually hearing it through your ears. So the first time you hear your own voice, just know that you're doing fine. And that's what people hear. So there's active learning, there's passive learning, there's reading. And I do read my stuff a lot and just go over it and over it and over it. The other thing I do, and every speaker is different. So what you do or what you don't do is completely up to you. It depends on what you find that works. But I create what's called a memory palace. And this actually comes out of a Sherlock Holmes book. It actually comes way before that, like Roman speakers, the ones that would get up and orate for like 5 hours would remember things this way. What you do is you create kind of a physical journey of your talk, and you put out things that are going to remind you of certain bits. And you just kind of get used to walking this journey as you say your talk, and things will hang on in your mind. Now, the nice thing about creating a memory palace, and I'll explain more about what it actually is here in a second, but the best part about creating it this way is that if you get off in your talk, if something happens in your trip, you have someone who comes in the back door with 2 kids, 6 umbrellas, and 4 bags and rattles and makes as much noise as possible and throws you off. And I'm saying this because I've had it happen. If you have a memory palace, you can get back on track because you can remember what your next step is. So, for example, for my talk, my opening story starts with me sleeping on the couch. And so that's where I start. In my memory palace, I'm sitting on my couch for real, and I'm doing that story. So that as I'm doing that story, I'm reliving what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it smells like to be on this couch. The next part of my talk, I actually define empathy because, as anybody knows who's listened to my podcast, I'm very passionate about making sure we're all talking about the same thing. And there's a lot of misconceptions about empathy. So I have a book on my table about empathy. And as I'm talking that part of my talk, I'm looking at that book so that I can say, okay, these are my definitions. This is what this is about. I move a little bit around my coffee table to where I have an intro paragraph. And then when I move to the other side of my table, I have 3 highlighters sitting there because I talk about 3 kinds of empathy. So as I'm looking at these 3 highlighters, they remind me, yeah, these are the 3 kinds of empathy I want to highlight. Then I go over to a different table and I start talking about the two ways we relate through self-empathy. So I have 2 candles there because I'm talking about bringing the light onto empathy. And you get the picture. I mean, everywhere I go, there's something to remind me of the little bits of my talk. And the thing I've done in the middle of it is I've taken bits and pieces off of my visualization board, like a little sign that I had that said TEDx. And I have it sitting right there just to remind myself that, this is real. It's really happening, which is exciting. Then, once I've done this walk through my memory palace, what feels like about 100,000 times, then I start practicing in front of my camera and I watch because I want to see what body movements I have, what motions I'm doing, how I'm bringing the audience with me. I actually don't do this watching part so much just because I'm kind of trying to stay within my own eyes. I will do a lot of visualization though, which means that as I'm talking, I will close my eyes and I'll visualize the audience and I'll visualize the people in it and I'll visualize me turning and speaking to them and going through my talk. If you do one thing for speaking, I think this one's the most important. This is something I learned to do as a musician because you're not going to be on the front of the stage playing a concerto in front of an audience until you do it. So you can't practice it. So the only way to practice it is to practice it in your mind. Now, the good thing is that your mind doesn't necessarily recognize the difference between memories, what you're creating within your mind, and real things. So if you do this enough over and over and over again, your mind gets used to it as if you're actually doing it, which gives you the chance to practice what you're doing before you do it. This is something else that athletes and artists do all the time because there's no other way to be able to get this kind of practice. You can't practice for the Super Bowl by going to the Super Bowl over and over. I think Tom Brady has the record right now and he still has 11, 12? I don't know. Someone in the audience knows this better than I do. But the point is that's different than putting in 10,000 hours in Super Bowls. You can't. So in order to get that practice, visualize what you're doing. Visualize where you're going. Visualize what it's going to sound like, what it's going to smell like, what it's going to see, what you're going to see, what you're going to do. Take the time to look up the hall if you can. Get an idea of what you're actually going to be seeing and doing. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm practicing. I am working through the talk. I am visualizing a lot. And I'm doing a lot of passive learning, a lot of listening. If I'm in the kitchen making dinner, I'm listening. If I'm cleaning, I'm listening. I usually play it before I go to sleep and as soon as I wake up in the morning. But I know this kind of practice is going to make this super solid so that when I actually walk out on stage on April 3rd, I'm going to be able to nail it to the wall. And that's what you want. You want to be able to have that kind of confidence as a speaker, that you can do this upside down on your head in a windstorm, surrounded by bunny rabbits, whatever. You can pull this out and make it work every single time. Now, one final note on that. Pulling this out and making it work doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. I already know walking into this that what happens on stage is not going to be verbatim what's on the script. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be mistakes because I am a human being and I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going for perfection. I'm going to get my message out to a larger audience. TEDx is my vehicle to do that. You need to employ self-empathy before you even take the stage so that you know it's not going to be perfect. It's just not. But it's going to be enough. I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm going to be enough. This isn't going to be perfect, but it's going to be exactly what I need. If you walk out onto that stage and you tell yourself that this has to be perfect, you're going to fail every time. Because our definition of what is perfection changes. If you think perfection is having this absolutely word perfect and going off the script word by word by word by word, it's not going to happen. But You can create a performance that's going to bring your audience with you, that's going to get your word out there, and that will change lives. And that's what I want. I want to change lives for the better. I had somebody laugh at me last week because I said, I just want to change the world. Is that too much to ask? But it's the truth. I want to make this world a better place. And I believe this will do it. So, that's my TEDx journey up to now. This is my TEDx special edition. And I will be happy to fill you in on the full thing when I give my talk April 3rd. And I hope anybody who's listening to this sends me good thoughts and good vibes, because this message is one the world needs to hear. Thanks so much for being here. Please like, subscribe, and comment. And we'll see you next time for the next episode.